participants. It's really my pleasure to address you on behalf of the United Nations Economic Commission and the Food and Agriculture Organization today on the occasion of the side event, the science and policy of wildfires in the boreal biome. This virtual event is organized by the joint UNECE FAO Forestry and Timber Section in collaboration with the Team of Specialists on Boreal Forests. We are grateful to the International Boreal Forest Research Association for letting us be part of their excellent conference. Ladies and gentlemen, the month of August is wildfire season in many regions, and there is a lot to say about how to deal with fires, especially as the climate is changing. Contrary to popular beliefs, fire is actually a natural part of ecological cycles. Some amount of natural burnings sustain ecosystems, and this is particularly the case in the boreal zone, where 3 species are adapted to fire and some even depend on it to reproduce. Indigenous people have always understood this way of living with fire by practicing light burning, which reduce the risk of large fires by reducing high fuel loads. They have lobbied for decades to allow prescribed burning. Research shows that it decreases fire risk, leads to less damaging wildfire events, and it is good to see that this method is now practiced in a number of countries. Yet, over the last decades, fire management policies have largely focused on combating fire rather than living with it. This is exemplified by suppression measures aiming to put out fires as soon as they occur, which has led to the accumulation of combustible matter in forests and thus larger and more severe fires. Climate change adds another layer of complexity. We have seen references to fires and climate change recently in Greece, Canada, Turkey, and Siberia, along with the timely release of the first installment of the IPCC's 6th assessment report that again confirms the science. Temperatures continue to increase. It is getting not only warmer, but also drier in some parts, which further increases the likelihood of fires in the boreal zone. This significantly impacts the ecosystem's ability to regenerate. The boreal forest holds significant potential for mitigating climate change and its effects, and the world's largest terrestrial carbon storehouse, the boreal biome, is vital for stabilizing the global climate and providing long-lived wood products. It also provides livelihoods to rural and indigenous communities and is a habitat for many iconic species. But in order to deliver all these essential services, the ecosystem needs to be resilient to disturbances like fires. With the alarming findings of the new IPCC report, there has never been a more urgent need to revive damaged ecosystems. Ecosystems support all life on Earth. The healthier our ecosystems are, the healthier the planet and its people. This is also one of the messages of the United Nations Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. I hope that this event will carry this overarching message forward as we deal with the many disturbances faced by our forests. Our challenges are managing wildfires in different countries of the boreal region and preparing and including local communities in decision-making. This can only be successfully addressed together. In addition, it is essential to develop evidence-based policy measures that are backed by the scientific community and scalable in practice. We need to learn how to live with wildfires rather than against them. We have less than 10 years to drastically reduce our emissions to maintain the 1.5% degrees Celsius target and achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, amongst them SDG 15, what is life on land. And this is why this event is indeed very, very important and the discussion urgently needed. Ladies and gentlemen, I look forward to reading the summary of today's discussion and wish you all a successful meeting. Thank you. Back to you, Leonie.
Thank you very much, Madam Executive Secretary, for opening the meeting. And let me now pass it on to Mr. Florian Kraxner, the current president of the International Boreal Forest Research Association, for a short welcome. Over to you, Florian.
Thank you very much, Leonie, and thank you also, Olga, for this really great introduction. There is actually not a lot to say then, that this session, this very session, is at the heart of both IBFRA and, of course, the team of specialists of Boreal Forests. There is a scientific problem. This is wildfires caused by several reasons, human ignition, but of course also natural ignition. And the whole thing is further pushed and heavily impacted in its system by a changing climate. And this was also mentioned by Olga, that this is something we have to look into. And what is the consequence? The consequence is that policy needs to deal with that, and not only in a couple of years, but it needs to deal with it right now. And we, as the scientists, and on the other hand, the policymakers, are responsible to some extent to really bring the right information over and to take action. And let me just show two slides from my welcome note on Monday again, which I think is very important to see here. And this is the hotspot that is projected under business as usual, so to say. If we don't change anything, by 2100, what we can see here, where fires will occur in the boreal region. And this is close to everywhere on an annual basis. And the underlying model runs, preliminary model runs, show globally that we might up to double the area that is burned on an annual basis compared to now, and it is already quite extreme now. And if we zoom into Russia, for instance, we see that we might even triple the area that is burned on an annual basis if we don't start mitigating and decarbonizing now. So this is basically the message. I would like to welcome you all to this special session by UNECE in the name of IBFRA, in my own name and my Vice President's name, Raisa Mekipe. Thank you very much for joining.
Thank you so much, Florian, and actually thank you for transitioning nicely into our main part of the event, and also wanted to take the opportunity to thank the IBFRA conference team, mainly Elaine, for this really amazing work you put together, and for your support also during this meeting. And with that, I would like to wrap up the opening and hand over to our moderator of today, Ms. Maria Sokolenko, the Deputy Head of the Analytical Unit of Federal Forestry Agency of the Russian Federation. And Maria is also the chairperson of the ECE Committee on Forests and the Forest Industry, so very much actively involved in our work. It's a pleasure to have you, and I will let you take over now. Thank you, Maria.
Thank you, Leonie, for giving me the floor, and greetings to all the colleagues, speakers and participants to this event. Thank you, distinguished Olga and Florian, for your opening remarks, and for welcoming us all to this discussion. It is really an honor and a pleasure to see the interest from IBFRA, from UNECE, and from FAO to the issues that we are discussing today. I'm delighted for the opportunity to moderate this event, focusing on science and policy of wildfires in the boreal biome. In my own country and in many other countries and regions around the world, people are facing the challenge of wildfires. Those who live far from the fire-prone regions more and more see the wildfires from the screens of the TVs, from the headlines of the newspapers they read. Recently, as you all know, more and more people are getting engaged in social network, communicating photos of fire-disturbed regions, locations, burned houses, and frightened animals. And thus, more and more audience are getting involved into these discussions. So why are the forest fires happening? How to live with them? And what should be done to prevent catastrophic scenarios? Etc., etc. And policymakers, researchers, environmental NGOs, general public, all offer very different opinions. So as Leonie mentioned in the very beginning, together with the colleagues from the team of specialists on Boreal Forests, we came up with the idea to suggest an event on science and policy of wildfires in the biome region. And I'm pleased to welcome you all to this virtual roundtable, where I hope we will discuss this really burning issue. It is really a pleasure to see your faces, many familiar ones. Well, a pity that we are again in virtual format, but hopefully that we will meet in person one day. It's a pleasure to see our new faces among us as well. We have a great panel of experts. Many of them have been involved in wildfire research and practice, and they can bring to the table years of relevant experience. So as you can see from our program, the first part of the session will feature 3 presentations that will shed light on the current drivers and trends of wildfires in the regions of North America, Europe, and Russia. So for the first presentation, let me give the floor to Mr. Frank Koch. Frank is a research ecologist and team leader for forest health monitoring research with the USDA Forest Service. His primary research focus is on quantitative and spatial analysis of forest health data, but Frank has also worked extensively on analysis of short and long-term drought patterns. Frank has a long-standing collaboration with the Canadian Forest Service scientists on cross-border forest health analysis and has prepared his presentation in collaboration with Mr. Denis Yemshanov, who is a research scientist with the Canadian Forest Service. Thank you, colleagues, and now the screen is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Let's see here.
We can see your slides. But we see the,
Yeah, okay.
If
Can
can you just do it again and I show you where to click? Just click on presentation mode again, and then on the top left of your screen. So presentation mode. Are you in presentation mode right now?
Yeah.
Can
it's
you
sharing on the wrong screen. Hold on a second.
Yeah, but so if you go, click here, slideshow, and then on top you'll see you don't see switch. Can someone help then? Show taskbar maybe?
It's under display settings.
So if you
I see. Okay.
Okay.
Swap presenter view. Thank you very much. There we go.
All right. Very good.
Yes. Well, again, thank you for that. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. So I want to convey that we're sharing well-established information and a common understanding of the situation with respect to wildfires in boreal North America. And the material will be familiar to many North American scientists and foresters, but we recognize that it's probably not as familiar to our colleagues from elsewhere in the world. And so I'm just going to go ahead and get started. Okay, so together, Canada and the United States, meaning specifically Alaska, have nearly 1/3 of the worldwide boreal zone. And as you see here, a large majority of Canadian forests are boreal forests, and the boreal forests of Alaska account for nearly 20% of all United States forests. Conifers predominate in the North American boreal forest, especially black and white spruce, as well as jack pine in more southerly areas. And there are some deciduous species as well, aspen, poplar, birch species that are most commonly intermixed with the conifers. Fires are integral to North American boreal forest ecosystems. As much as several million hectares are burned annually across Canada and Alaska, and generally more than 1 million hectares even in relatively low fire years. The fires can be large in spatial extent, although fire sizes are relatively variable across the region. And regardless of fire size, you can see from these maps that wildfires have a significant geographic footprint in the boreal region. And fire regimes also vary, but many boreal forest types in North America, especially those dominated by black spruce, are subject to fire return intervals of several decades or more and subsequent stand replacing fires. So at regional to continental scales, wildfires in North American boreal forests are governed foremost by climate. Climate oscillations such as the Pacific Decadal Oscillation and the El Nino Southern Oscillation have a strong influence on annual to decadal climate. And warmer and drier conditions during positive phases in these oscillations tend to lead to highly active fire seasons. And as with many other biomes, annual fire seasons in North American boreal forests are shaped by fire conducive weather. And I want to point out the amount of winter snowpack and the timing of snowpack melt is thought to be highly influential on fuel moisture and wildfire occurrence. Early snow melt and runoff can translate to moisture deficit later in the year, and that can result in large scale drying of fuels and increased fire activity. The most important ignition sources are lightning and humans. Lightning, as you can see in these charts, lightning has a much greater effect on the landscape, with lightning caused fires burning more area, even though the majority of fires are caused by humans. And this phenomenon is true in Alaska as well as Canada. So for the last 60 years, boreal forests in Canada seem to have been moving toward more active fire regimes. And as these charts show, there's a fair amount of observed year-to-year variability, but across, throughout that, there are significant increasing trends in terms of both total area burned annually, as you can see on the left, and the number of large fires at least 200 hectares in size. There is some research evidence suggesting that large fires have been getting larger and that the fire season has been getting longer. And at this point, it's starting about a week earlier and ending about a week later than it did historically. In any case, the data together seem to suggest and indicate some early effects of a warming climate in boreal Canada. And it's a similar story for Alaska. When we plot the data for the last 80 years for Alaska, we see a steadily increasing trend in the number of fires. And again, while there's a fair amount of year-to-year variability, the 10-year moving average, so that blue dotted line there, you can see that there's this substantial jump in the total area burned each year. This has been true, especially in the last couple of decades. And again, echoing what we saw for Canada, this could be an indication of early effects from a warming climate. So in terms of future trends, I won't go into specifics regarding different general circulation model projections and emission scenarios. Since at this point, we seem to be tracking globally towards the higher scenarios, such as RCP 8.5. So not going into details, just to summarize, climate scenarios project increasing temperatures, decreasing soil moisture, as well as overall water availability, and greater forest fuel accumulation in North American boreal forests. And these circumstances are expected to lead to significant increases in the number of large fires and the annual area burned. As I mentioned, we've already seen some evidence of longer fire seasons, and they are projected to become even longer. In addition, there is expected to be more frequent occurrence of extreme fire weather, and this will, has a good chance of triggering large catastrophic fires. We again mentioned earlier the importance of lightning and human ignitions for North American boreal forests, and both are expected to increase in the future. Intuitively, human ignitions will go up as fire seasons lengthen, simply because there are more ignition opportunities. And with respect to lightning, so this figure shows in Alaska, June and July lightning strikes are projected to increase between 105 and 125% by 2100. And the expectations, at least for Western Canada, are similar. So we have a few handful of concluding points. Most importantly, a changing climate is expected to cause significant transformations in North American boreal forest ecosystems. And these are mostly for the things the aspects I mentioned on the previous slides. Rising temperatures and moisture deficit are also expected to exacerbate forest pest impacts. This will further increase wildfire risk. Suppression will become more problematic. We anticipate significant strain on fire management agencies in Canada and the United States. And finally, larger, more intense fires will increase response costs, and this will magnify threats to human infrastructure and public health. And that is me, so I'm going to stop sharing. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you a lot, Frank, for this brief but very insightful presentation with lots of trends already mentioned and depicted on the slides. Well, indeed, it is not only warming here, but also human activities still causing lots of fires together with lightings, and it all will again result in the consequences for both humans and climate. So kind of circular line which is always evolving. Thank you for these observations. And I would like all the participants and speakers to probably share their comments and questions in the chat box. I think that in the end of our session today, we will have a special questions and answers session to address them all specifically. So thank you again, Frank and Dennis. And with this, we are turning to the European region. I would like now to invite Mr. Henrik Lindberg, Senior Lecturer at the Ham University of Applied Sciences. Henrik has 30 years of experience in education and training related to prescribed burnings and forest fire prevention. He has recently contributed to the project on forest fires in Fennoscandia under changing climate and forest cover. And the results of these projects probably are in the core of his presentation. So we're looking very much forward to hearing about them. Frank, sorry, Henrik, please. Yes, the screen is yours.
Thank you. Can you see and hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Great. Okay, so I'll talk a little bit, concentrate on Fennoscandia, the boreal zone, like here, which is Sweden, Finland, and mostly Republic of Karelia. Since there's a Russian presentation also, I would exclude the other part. And I will also exclude Scotland and Norway because the story there is a little bit different and the area is minor. Quickly, if we look at the trends where we have statistics, we can see that in Karelia, there has been a decrease maybe 50 to 70 years ago. In Sweden, it has been relatively same. And in Finland, there was a steep decrease. And so the regions differ. And lately, I will discuss a little bit more about the recent years. And then here you can see the numbers. There has been, the number of fires has stayed in relatively similar level, maybe a decreasing trend in the Republic of Karelia, part of Russian Federation. And here is another where you can see more clearly, here are the hectare scale. So you can see that there has been a decreasing trend or decrease in Karelia. In Sweden has stayed relatively the same, and in Finland this has been low. And here, the point here is that in Finland, where we have quite a long fire statistics going to 1865, there was a steep decrease in 50s. And then in Sweden, where we also have sporadic data before it happened earlier. Sorry, now okay, it's just a little bit slow. So to summarize, in Republic of Karelia, the areas are larger, and so is the average size. And in Sweden, the areas are quite similar to Finland in many years, but there is also this fluctuation, major fire years. But in Finland, the burned areas, the annual areas are low and fires there. So if you look at the reasons, climate is about the same. Yet there are some research articles that also say that there is a gradient from west to east. Topography, for instance, in Sweden, there are more slopes than in Finland. Then there are different in fire suppression efforts and firefighting policies. Also have been changing in human behavior and rural demographics, which are still going on in all of these countries with different rates. And also there has been changes and differences in forest management and impact on forest structure. So it's very crucial how the fires are caught and limited. For instance, how we manage to keep them so small and prevent us to escalate into large fires. And here the density of network plays a role. Also the forest compartment or stand size, which is smallest in Finland and larger in Sweden and in the Republic of Karelia. The bigger forests you have bigger fires. There have also been different silvicultural policies, tree species favoring spruce pine ratio, crown fire risk, which also maybe explains some of the difference, and also the silvicultural policies. And also the organization and strategy of firefighting varies. For instance, in Russian Karelia, fires are tolerated a bit more than in Sweden and in Finland, which partially explains the larger fires. Here you can see an example from the forest network from Finland and Russian Karelia. In Sweden, it's somewhere in between. So you see this function as a national fuel break network and also help to access the fires more quickly. Here you can see the shift that has happened in Finland and Sweden from after Second World War. So shifting from uneven age spruce pine, usually spruce pine, Norway spruce, Scots pine dominated coniferous forest to monocultural forest which are thin, which decreases the crown fire risk. So we have the shift to vertical fuel and continuity, and also landscape structure that shifting from transforming the former large uniform forest to mosaic-like landscape, and like I said, the mosaic or the patch size is smallest in Finland and largest in Russian Karelia, and this also maybe explains some of the differences. So recent years, several big fires have occurred in Sweden. There was the biggest fire in in almost 100 years, about 13,000 hectares. The first Boreal mega fire in Fennoscandia for 100 or something like that years. And in Sweden, there was also a really exceptional fire where 25,000 with 4 large fires forming about 20,000 hectares. In Finland, there has been 2 of the large fires, 200 to 300 hectare fires. They are small in international scale, but in Finland's scale, they are big, and it's been 20, 30, 40 years since we have fires like this. And then, of course, the extreme fire summer in the Republic of Karelia, state of national emergency. We probably hear a little bit more maybe on the Russian presentation. And so meteorologically, there probably has not been an increase of fire risk during last century, but just, you know, it's been predicted to increase maybe 5, 10, maybe 1 week to 2 weeks extra, but a long prolonged fire season. And it's unclear whether the fire events are caused by warming climate or if they're just bad luck or bad handling. So there are both kind of opinions. Some say that we have similar years before, and some say that you can clearly see that there's a fingerprint. So we're somehow in the fringe of the climate change. And here you can see how it's predicted. Fire risk is predicted to increase in all areas, but then these arrows and their sizes and not sizes, but yeah, sizes. Sorry, the directions are probably the same, but we can affect the sizes. So we can affect it by management. So this is something, and clear maybe needs more work. So here are the conclusions. Long-term decrease in last year, several uncommonly large fire events. Fire is predicted to increase, yet we can affect, but it probably needs more effort and more work. And finally, here's a comprehensive report of a recent project that I was quite much referred to. Thank you.
Thank you a lot, Henrik. Yes, thank you. I invite you to share the link that is on your slide into the chat box. Probably it would be easier for colleagues to proceed and get acquainted with the details of this project. As we see, the Fennoscandia region is well, more or less the same subregions. I mean, from the point of view of the landscape conditions, climate conditions you have mentioned, but still the differences are obvious. And also it came to my mind, we were discussing with my Karelian colleagues just probably a week ago that in Sweden and in Finland, there are even specific exercises to use fire for biodiversity, just following the idea brought in the very beginning by Madam Executive Secretary regarding the fire-dependent species. So sometimes fire is too much or too active, and sometimes the lack of it is something that is missing for sustainable development, probably. In Karelia, I don't think that we have this for biodiversity purposes, but anyway, we will have a representative from our local research institute, and I think that Alexander will have an opportunity to dwell on it. Also, as we see in the European region, as well as in North Karelia, in North America, we have a longer fire season, and the fire risks are expected to increasing in the future. And one bright idea that I suppose many colleagues will share is that we probably can somehow influence the fire risks by proper management. So probably this is one topic that we should also bring further for our home task and further discussions. So thank you again, Henrik. And lastly, let us look at my country, the Russian Federation, represented by Mr. Roman Kotelnikov. Roman is the head of the Center of Forest Biology. That is a branch of All Russian Research Institute of Silviculture and Mechanization of Forestry, located in Krasnoyarsk, Russia. Roman worked at the Boreal Forest Protection Service and in Russian Ministry of Natural Resources. He has prepared the presentation in cooperation with Mr. Andrei Yeritsov from the Aerial Forest Fire Center Avialesakhrana. But Andrei unfortunately wasn't able to join us today because he had to return to Yakutia, the region of Russia that is currently most affected by forest fires. Taking this opportunity, I would like to send his kindest regards to all the participants and give the floor to Roman.
Сейчас я зайду туда.
We can see your slides. But we cannot hear you. Roman, you are on mute, so you need to unmute yourself.
Добрый день, коллеги. Сейчас переключу.
We can hear you
now. Я надеюсь, меня слышно. Так, сейчас уберем доклад. Ну, как уже было сказано, что я представляю доклад совместно с моим коллегой из авиалесохраны. Доклад посвящен ситуации с пожарами в нашей стране. Как вы знаете, что бореальные леса в России, они выполняют очень важную экологическую функцию, и не только на глобальном, но и там, на региональном уровне. Они простираются от границы с Финляндией там, до Тихого океана и на площади практически там, более 800 миллионов гектар. При этом они являются довольно надежным хранилищем для углерода. Существующие экосистемы в бореальных лесах России, они формировались в течение тысяч лет и ежегодно подвергались воздействию лесных пожаров, в том числе и там, по 1000 гектар. При этом катастрофические всплески таких пожаров возникали обычно с периодичностью 20-50 лет. А в последнюю сотню лет дополнительно к этому добавился еще серьезный антропогенный фактор. И, кроме того, все знают о изменениях климата.
Владимирович, я прошу прощения, поделитесь с экраном. Поставьте презентацию. Мне не видно, возможно, это только у меня.
Сейчас.
Угу.
Это у всех.
Почему-то переключилось. Секундочку. Ага, сейчас все будет.
Да, теперь порядок.
Так.
Can see your screen.
Ну, для снижения негативных последствий от лесных пожаров в России создана многоуровневая система охраны лесов. Она и вертикальное разделение по уровням полномочий, и горизонтальное между ведомствами. И ключевую роль, конечно, в этом играют регионы. Они отвечают непосредственно за тушение и обнаружение пожаров. Кроме того, сами лесопользователи отвечают за противопожарное устройство лесов и предотвращение лесных пожаров. На федеральном уровне закреплено контроль, надзор. Кроме того, Рослесхоз обеспечивает функционирование информационной системы дистанционного мониторинга, которая является таким ключевым инструментом и для контроля за лесопожарной ситуацией, и в том числе для обнаружения лесных пожаров на удаленных территориях, ну и также как бы дополнительный контроль за ситуацией в дополнение к наземным и авиационным способам. Естественно, полный, одинаковый уровень охраны обеспечить на всей территории Российской Федерации это экономически нецелесообразно, поэтому в России предусмотрено выделение зон с разным уровнем охраны. Это позволяет оптимизировать ресурсы и тем самым увеличить уровень охраны в тех регионах, где это более необходимо. Ну, с появлением космических систем мониторинга существенно изменился и подход к тушению лесных пожаров на удаленных территориях. То есть теперь, кроме одним из критериев по принятию решений о целесообразности тушения, стали там не только близость населенных пунктов, в этом случае тушение в обязательном порядке производится, но и есть возможность оценивать, сопоставлять возможный ущерб от лесного пожара и также затраты на его тушение. Кроме того, сейчас жестко регламентируется порядок принятия решений о приоритетах в тушении. Во-первых, выделены специальные зоны, где такое возможно. Во-вторых, решения о целесообразности принимаются специальной комиссией во главе с губернаторами в регионах. Что касается ситуации, многие знают, что тепловые изменения, температурные изменения, они неравномерны и по территории. Все это приводит к тому, что возникает увеличение доли лесных пожаров, которые возникают на северных территориях, северной 56-й широты. То, что раньше составляло примерно 2%, 8% доля таких северных пожаров, начиная с 2015 года есть устойчивый тренд по увеличению таких пожаров. И, как видите, к 2020 году уже достигло до 14%. Но повышение температуры – это такой не единственный негативный фактор. Есть, явно наблюдается увеличение количества дней без дождей, то есть даже при таком незначительном изменении средних температур существенно увеличивается доля бездождливых дней, то есть без осадков, что приводит к повышению пожарной опасности в лесах, то есть увеличивается доля дней с высоким классом пожарной опасности. Вот на этой карте видно данные, которые формировались до 2020 года. Но еще в прошлом году мы прогнозировали существенное увеличение пожаров, которые будут возникать в республике Саха-Якутия, то, что сейчас как раз и наблюдается. Кроме этого, существует целый ряд косвенных изменений, связанных с пожарами. Например, существенно увеличилась доля пожаров от гроз, и несмотря на то, что это тоже неравномерно по территории, здесь приведен пример наиболее крупных регионов, в частности, по Красноярскому краю эта доля сейчас достигает половины, то есть 50%. По республике Саха-Якутия практически 90% пожаров сейчас возникает от гроз. Но этот тренд цикличный, он зависит от солнечной активности, так что, вероятнее всего, в ближайшее время он будет снижаться. Ну, в качестве других еще важных тенденций следует отметить то, что в последние годы существенно увеличивается доля пожаров в покрытой лесом площади, то есть в лесах, если взять от всей площади природных пожаров. Кроме того, в принципе, половина всех пожаров в лесах, оно изначально возникает на непокрытой лесом площади, это тоже так сохраняется. Несмотря на то, что большая часть пожаров, конечно, в весенний период возникает, сейчас основная пройденная площадь, то есть по площади, в основном пожары летние, то есть увеличивается доля площади летних пожаров. Летние пожары, они отличаются от весенних тем, что они более устойчивые. Это приводит к тому, что больше процент гибели. Естественно, это сказывается на том, что общая тенденция по увеличению гибели от пожаров, это тоже приводит, то есть тоже видно. Кроме того, летние пожары существенно сложнее тушить. Это, к сожалению, усложняет работу по тушению пожаров. Ну, зная о климатических изменениях, сейчас еще бы убрать. У нас проводится работа по совершенствованию лесопожарного зонирования. И, естественно, при совершенствовании зонирования сейчас больше внимания приходится уделять и задымлениям, в том числе с учетом преимущественных ветров, распределения населения по территориям. Вот в ходе исследования у нас выявлен интересный факт о том, что, к сожалению, меняются преимущественные ветра, то есть то, что раньше не было таким серьезной проблемой, теперь это уже становится более очевидно. Кроме того, конечно, сейчас сложно судить, насколько устойчивы эти изменения. Для этого нужны дополнительные исследования. Ну, сам факт большого количества пожаров в стране, естественно, принимаются меры. Та же сложная ситуация, которая сложилась в Республике Якутия. Вот руководством страны приняты дополнительные меры, в том числе выделение средств, примерно сопоставимо 30% от объема средств, выделенных на охрану лесов. Причем речь идет не только о тушении пожаров, то есть средства выделяются еще и на авиационное патрулирование и на закупку техники лесопожарной. Ну, кроме таких разовых экстренных мер, планируется еще действительно регулярное увеличение средств на лесное хозяйство в целом, в том числе на охрану лесов от пожаров. И планируется больше внимания уделять на подготовку кадров. Ну, что касается подведения выводов, кратко я остановлюсь на том, что, повторюсь, что увеличивается напряженность пожароопасных периодов. Она, к сожалению, неравномерна, но темп увеличения, он даже превышает темп увеличения средней температуры. Также увеличивается доля пройденной огнем площади, покрытой лесом. Меняется пространственное распределение, увеличивается доля пожаров, которые возникают на северах, и, к сожалению, увеличивается доля летних пожаров. Ну, кроме этого, еще, то есть, как я говорил, увеличивается доля пожаров с большей гибелью лесов. Но одним из наиболее важных моментов, на которые следует обращать внимание, это, конечно, на задымление. Особенно это важно в контексте изменения преимущественных ветров. Ну и сам факт, конечно, охрана лесов от пожаров, она становится таким важным элементом стратегии будущего перехода на адаптивно ориентированное лесное хозяйство, которое направлено на предотвращение ухудшения структуры лесного фонда, а также на сокращение эмиссий углерода. Ну, важно, чтобы стратегическое планирование охраны лесов от пожаров опиралось все-таки на научные результаты, на научное обоснование. Ну и как раз в этой сфере тут очень важно международное сотрудничество. В целом, я благодарю вас за внимание. Если кратко, у меня все.
Thank you, Roman, a lot. Quite insightful report from your side, especially now when it is almost night, I suppose, in Krasnoyarsk. Thank you for joining. And indeed, I can see your observation about expansion of fires, of forest fires to the north. It is one of the trends that probably we should pay attention to. And of course, it means suppression more problematic. On the other hand, I can observe that like in the countries of North America, in Russia, we face the challenge of more and more implications for the budget. I mean that it is not only complicated to fight fires, but it is also more and more expensive when they are big and active. So thank you again, Roman. And now let us launch our first moderated discussion on dealing with increased risks of wildfires and managing its drivers. I would also like to remind participants that we should stick to very limited time, unfortunately, because we don't have very much time on our hands. So please stick to 3 minutes of statements. And we have the following colleagues with us today. Mrs. Lynn Johnson is a forest fire research specialist with the Canadian Forest Service, Ontario, Canada. Her research interests include climate change, fire behavior, fire impacts, and fire risks. Mr. Anatoly Shvidenko is a professor at the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis in Austria. Before that, Anatoly served as the director of the All-Russian Scientific Research and Information Center for Forest Resources in Moscow. He has a very extensive background in forestry and related fields. And Mr. Alexander Krishin is the director of the Forest Research Institute and chief researcher in the laboratory of Boreal Forest Dynamics and Production Forest Research Institute at the Research Center of Republic of Karelia. He's the author of several dozens of scientific papers, and his major research areas include landscape ecology, forestry, forest resources, phytosociology, reforestation, nature protection, covering forest conservation. Without further ado, I would like to turn to you, Lynn. You have worked on the blueprint for wildland fire science in Canada from 2019 through 2029, which presents a business case to increase investment in wildland fire science. What are some of the recommendations from this blueprint in terms of dealing with the increasing risks of wildfires and managing its drivers? Could you please share with us?
Sure, thanks, Maria. Yeah, so Canada, we have this really great new document called the Blueprint for Wildland Fire Science, and kind of outlines a really good plan for what the research needs are and how to address these increasing risks. You know, you see Canada right now, we're having this really, really bad fire season. And I mean, across the world, if you're watching the news, you realize this risk is only going to get worse, and it's hard to feel like it's not just this helpless situation. But the reality is there really are so many options to address the risk. I could talk about this for days, but I'll stick to the 3 minutes. Some things I'd like to point out: landscape fuel treatments, whether they're mechanical fuel adjustments or prescribed burning. We need to promote good fire for landscape resilience. Using local knowledge, traditional knowledge, and Western science knowledge for how to best burn and reburn and create these mosaics or patchworks across the landscape when there is high risk. Another approach that's really important is making structures more likely to survive when there is a fire by managing the flammability immediately surrounding the buildings, but also making those structures more resistant to ignition. Planning into the future with fire in mind is important both for forestry, but also for development for community lands, new communities or expanding communities. Evacuations are a really important way that, especially in Canada, we reduce the risk to human life directly or even indirectly. If there's a lot of smoke in an area, we'll evacuate people. And overall, I mean, addressing the risk by enhancing your emergency management planning, preparedness, and really understanding what the risks are and what the capabilities are for emergency management of fire and multiple hazards being managed at once, as we're seeing with fire during a pandemic, which is really interesting. So, I mean, those are just a few of the ways that we can deal with this fire risk, and I'll link to the blueprint, which points out a lot of really other good points. There's really no single solution, and we're going to need lots of different approaches. We can target different aspects of risks, whether it's the likelihood side or the impact side. And we really need to manage those drivers. As we heard in the introduction from Olga, the next decade of climate change management is critical to be able to avoid those things like doubling of area burned, more frequent fires where people are living, more unmanageable fire. So in the end, we need better tools, more collaboration to be able to live with fire, because really we are a fire planet, as we all know. So yeah, I'll leave it there. Thanks, Maria.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you. And indeed, this season is challenging for many of our countries. Yeah, but that also means that your work is very, very timely and probably is getting more and more useful. As you wisely noted, it should be flexible. So very many conditions should be taken into note, and we would really appreciate if you could share this document, because I suppose it would be of great interest for many of us in the international fire and forest community. So
absolutely,
thanks a lot. Hopefully we will have time to get more acquainted with your work and activities. And now I would like to invite Mr. Anatoly. Well, given your extensive expertise in forestry, what is your opinion on how to deal with the risks of wildfires? What could governments, what could policymakers do to improve their response and their way to manage the drivers of wildfires?
Thank you, Maria. My very short intervention without any evidences and illustration is based on two prerequisites. One, my country, Russia, is entering now in transition to sustainable forest management, resilient to disturbances. From another side, climate change during the last 20 years is really in Russian territories unpredictable, I would say, because only the three numbers. If we look in forest fire, first period, 2000-2005, 6 million, last period before 20, more than 16. Record, 28 million yesterday due to last information of International SAO in 2020. And what is really dangerous, and we have to know, that last scientific results show, even for me, old forester, it's not only, I would say, it's very difficult to believe, because mortality, lethality of forests due to these results in middle of 2010, 2016, 17, something about 55%. That is almost 3 times more than it will be in 1990. That what we have to do from initial point, excuse me, Russia has a rather powerful forest fire protective system. But under current conditions, which we could expect, and in future, specifically for FCP 6.5, it's not really not enough. It's necessary simply to reconsider the national strategy and political profile of forest and forest fire protection. That's what it does mean. It means to increase, to improve everything in the system what we have. But it means it's necessary to look in future regional climate change scenarios and try to minimize future problems. The biggest risk, the biggest threat, that is catastrophic Russian and very severe heat waves in Russia. That is necessary to be ready to a really critical situation. That what could be said immediately during 1 minute, which I have. practically new if something new exists in this world. One point is, it's necessary to go to strategy of constant and effective fire prevention arrangement of forested area. That's known, but it should be new scale and new activities, system of fire protection, barriers, roads, regulation, forest composition in individual stand in large tracts, etc., etc. It should be part of state policy, part of any management and planning document. For future, this point is extremely important because Russia inevitably will go to a system of shift of forest to the north. And currently clear state policy, increasing accumulation, increasing of amount of carbon in forest. And during next 10, 15 years, at least in my understanding, at very old forester is from Russia, it could be done only in specially selected territories when we will be able to demonstrate that it's possible to protect taiga forest from fire and biogenic disturbances and really make forest a real mean for regulation of climatic system of the earth. I beg your pardon for very short possibility.
Well, it is we who should beg pardon for a very brief opportunity for the timing and strict timing in this case. But thank you a lot, Natalie, for this statement, for these remarks, because they are kind of echo what Florian said in the very beginning, that we should act and act now. And as far as I know, you're pretty much involved, not only in international, but also in all Russian cooperation. So probably you could also share here about your suggestions and definite ideas for how to improve the situation. On the other hand, happily, the most widespread species in Russia is larch, and that is pretty much fire adapted, depends on that. So I hope that we can that we will have the opportunity to continue this discussion further on. And now my thanks go to you, Natalie, and I would like to invite Mr. Alexander Krishin to join our discussion. Well, Alexander, you were recently involved in the study on trends and patterns in annually burned forest areas and fire weather across the European boreal zone in the 20th and early 21st centuries. So what can you say about the conclusions from this research about the opportunities of forest landscape restoration to increase the resilience of boreal forests to wildfires?
Thank you, Maria. Are you hear me? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. And it's very following the speech of Anatoly. To answer the question, how to manage drivers of the wildfires. We have not yet learned how to manage the weather and climate, but it is real to model the connection of fires with climate using dendrochronological and paleobotanical data. And waiting for catastrophe, if we will model these catastrophic years, we will should prepare for it, and so we can manage wildfires, but not the climate and the weather. And using the data of dendrochronological and paleobotanical studies, we can say that in Northern Europe, warming often goes in parallel with an increase in precipitation. And it means that warming of climate not lead to the wildfires, increasing of wildfires every time. And our research shows that the forest burned more during the so-called Little Ice Age, when relatively low temperatures were accompanied by low precipitation. At the same time, and I want to underline this, we should keep in mind that the very important things, we should expect periodic catastrophic weather events with this climate warming, which is quite clearly demonstrated by the situation in Karelia in these last decades. There were unusual for the region strong storms and then windstorms, which entail outbreaks of the number of bark beetles and the huge areas of dead wood and then fuel material. And from this point of view, from the point of view of fires, for example, this 2021 year, after a long series of quiet years, we observed many days of hot and dry weather, which led to catastrophic fires, which were stopped only for the rains that came after 2 months of dry weather. So, returning to the beginning of my speech, I want to say that we can't manage the drivers, we can't manage the climate, but we can be model the changes in climate, and then we can prepare for these catastrophic events. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexander. Well, indeed, it is not just about fires, and as you pointed out, it is just the frequency of catastrophic nature conditions that is increasing, and which is obvious around the globe, around the boreal zone. So it's not only about fire, but also about precipitation. We saw those events in Germany, in China already this year. And following your idea about absence of any possibility to manage climate, probably we should indeed get together and strengthen our cooperation to find ways to adapt to the new conditions. Yes, like Lynn has already mentioned, to be flexible and take very many trends and drivers in our minds to exchange what is the good experience in order to avoid what is the bad experience. Thank you a lot, Alexander. And I wanted to get back to you, Lynn, the only brave lady among the speakers at this session, to share your perspective on whether forest landscape restoration can be an effective tool to lower the risks of forest fires.
Sure, thanks. So yeah, definitely landscape forest restoration is an important thing for fire, and it can have multiple goals. As you know, it's not just fire. You need to think about the habitat, different landscape types, water, various land uses. And another thing I'd like to point out that it's important to approach restoration with both Indigenous and Western science knowledge and values, with locally accepted and locally backed solutions usually being the most effective. But it needs to be balanced with the need for, working at a large enough scale. So it's a tricky thing, but certainly you can, get more resilient landscapes. We need to think about, as I mentioned earlier, prescribed burning and returning fire to the landscape where it's appropriate. And taking advantage of, the landscape spatial fuel patterns and elevation and different species. That's really important as well. In Canada, forestry, we do have a decent amount of forestry going on, so that definitely plays a role. The term fire smart forestry has been around for a while, and that's just kind of using forestry as kind of a tool to enhance or decrease the risk to your communities and that kind of thing. We can kind of go beyond just stand level management and look at, harvest models at the landscape scale and fully get fire risk within those kind of harvest models. And another thing to think about is any tree planting activities, whether it's post-disturbance, post-harvest, or part of tree planting programs that are going on. those programs can be done strategically to reduce the fire risk. So planting fire-resistant species, working with non-forest patchworks across the landscape. Yeah, that's kind of all I wanted to cover there. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you a lot for further details about Canadian experience, and I also took note of your blueprint now shared in the chat. Well, alongside with the report about forest fires in Fennoscandia, also over there in the chat. For now, I don't see any questions. Well, unfortunately, in the chat box, that's why I would like to invite you, dear participants, speakers, observers, to write in the chat either in Russian or in English. Well, and now I invite you all to look further in this second part of our session that is about socioeconomic and socio-ecological implications of wildfires that are occurring in the boreal zone. We are going to also discuss how they should be addressed by policy. For this, I would like to invite Mr. Johan Goldammer, a professional forest and forest scientist specialized in fire ecology and fire management at the Max Planck Institute for Chemistry and professor for fire ecology at Freiburg University, Germany. In 1998, Johan established the Global Fire Monitoring Center and is serving as its director since then. So, Johan, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much for inviting me to contribute to this side event. And let me directly go into the presentation. Could you confirm that you see my presentation?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So today I will be talking about the socioeconomic and socio-ecological implications of wildfires in the boreal zone and how they should be addressed by policy. As you introduced myself, I'm from the Global Fire Monitoring Center, and as a successor arrangement of the former UNECE FAO Team of Specialists on Forest Fire in 2017, the Eurasian Team of Specialists on Landscape Fire Management was founded under the frame of the Global Wildland Fire Network. And let me just start with some visual impressions, how fires are interlinked with people, with society. We all remember the fires burning in Canada. This is just to remember that this region occasionally is in stress, where fires are severely affecting settlements and towns and even cities. The same is the case in Eurasia. All of us remember that 11 years ago, especially Western Russia had been hit by severe fires. And that is occurring repeatedly, as we see from the scenes of 2 years ago in Chita Oblast. So it's not only the forest that is burning, it's the open landscape. Often villages and settlements are surrounded by a mix of forests and grasslands or steppe ecosystems. What are the underlying causes of some changes in this vulnerability to fire? And a couple of years ago, we did a study looking at the rural exodus in the Russian Federation, which is basically the same trend as compared to the Euro-Mediterranean region. People are leaving the countryside. The young generation is going to city and is looking for a professional future in the cities. At the same time, the rural exodus is leading to an abandonment of intensive agriculture and even intensive forestry. So this is just a compilation of studies that have addressed the rural exodus, and I will be happy to share this presentation with all the participants in order to given opportunity to check for these resources. So what are the consequences of rural exodus if large tracts of agricultural lands are subjected to fallow and not managed anymore? The fire has much more fuels to burn. The fires are more intense, they are more severe, and they are more difficult to control. And now to build the bridge between the current situation and the Euro-Mediterranean region, we can see that there are many, many similarities. So the boreal zone, although it's not as densely populated as compared to the old cultural landscapes of Europe, Central and Southern Europe, we have these problems that you can see here on the screen. And now if it comes to the practice, how are we going to deal with fires, you know? And we see that we have so many different traditional sectoral agencies that are responsible for one certain land use system: forestry, national parks, protected areas, agricultural lands. And then we have the agencies that are responsible for protecting people, like civil protection, crisis management. We have the issue of public health, smoke pollution, we have seen that. And the Ministry for Environment or Ministry for Defense are also involved for their sectoral responsibilities. Furthermore, as we all know, fires and smoke is crossing the borders. So fire is not anymore a national issue. Fire has to be, and in certain cases is addressed by transboundary cooperation, or for instance, by transboundary agreements. Like, for instance, the UNECE Convention for Long-Range Transboundary Air Pollution, which does not explicitly include emissions from landscape fires, but it addresses with the Gothenburg Protocol the issue of black carbon transport. And what we can see in many countries of the world is that on the one side, in the settlements, in the cities, in the urban areas, fire is taken care pretty well by the fire and rescue services. In the case of forest ecosystems, we often have a shared responsibility between forest services and fire and rescue services. But very often we see a big problem in the agricultural lands, where there is a kind of vacuum of action. And if we are looking to the consequences of agricultural burning, which, by the way, is the main cause for forest fires or fires in protected areas, we see that, for instance, the transport of landscape fire emissions from North America to Greenland, to the Arctic, is very much visible, as we can see here on the soot-covered Greenland snow and ice. Agricultural burning is also very common here in the Eurasian region. And we see that especially spring fires, and this is a model run by the Norwegian Meteorological Institute, are a major source of transport of black carbon to the Arctic environment. So we see that those fires that are caused or used by people have a pretty big impact on secondary processes. And that refers also to the smoke pollution that is threatening human health and human security. And these kind of long-range pollution situations have been experienced numerous times throughout the world, between North American countries and Europe, between Eurasia and North America. But inside the Russian Federation, for instance, we remember a very severe smoke pollution episode in 2008. And in this year, the smoke of Yakutian fires is reaching Moscow region. And inside of this smoke, we have a number of toxic elements. So although we are all clear that these fires in the forests and open landscapes have been around for millennia, we are also aware that hundreds and thousands of years ago, the people were not aware of these risks, and they have been suffering this risk of smoke pollution. Now, as we know more about it today, we need to put all this on the balance of decision making. So there are a number of challenges for action, and we must ask ourselves if society as a whole, the public sector and civil society, are we sufficiently prepared to meet the current and the future threats? Do we have policies in place in agriculture, forestry, and conservation? Are the current institutional settings that we have, are they appropriate to be prepared for these changes? We see, and at international level, there are, according to our experience working in various countries of the world and the various regions, we should focus on addressing the issue of landscape fires. And explicitly, I'm not saying forest fires, because we are talking about all types of cultural, natural and urban industrial landscapes. We need to look to a more comprehensive and more cross-sectoral or horizontal approach in fire management. And the models of landscape fire management organizations that take care of the complexity and multidisciplinarity or transdisciplinarity should follow some principles that I have listed here, and which I may not need to read in detail, because you are happily invited to read the presentation and some sources later on. So we are talking about a well-coordinated, a holistic, a coherent, a cohesive and a coordinated approach. And this may require some new institutional arrangements, but focusing also on local people, and we will talk about it in the panel discussion, we need also to strengthen and to support the active participation of local populations, of civil society, to be better prepared to prevent fires and to eventually defend their own assets, their own villages, their own houses, their fields against fires. And we have a number of very good guidelines in regions that are not really boreal regions, but they are the hemiboreal and northern temperate countries, where we have developed over the last 10 years guidelines to capacitate people to participate, to actively participate, because we all know that no government in the world is able to control and to prevent fire on all land use systems. It is a responsibility of civil society to actively participate. And let me go back to the classical fire triangle that is used for teaching our firefighters, addressing the characteristics of what is burning and how to overcome the threats of fire. Nowadays, we have to look at an enlarged landscape fire triangle, where you see that the global issues, not only the local ones, are determining what is happening with regard to the fact that we are going to experience more severe and less controllable fire in the future. In the end, I would like to look back to 1991, when the Global Fire Monitoring Center first started to work to cooperate with the Russian Federation, and also building a bridge to all boreal countries and to develop a joint fire research agenda. The left book, Fire and Ecosystems of Boreal Eurasia, indeed was produced with the participation from countries from around, boreal countries from around the world. These are the proceedings of the 1993 Krasnoyarsk conference that we organized at the Sukhachov Institute, followed, this is just exemplary, by the white paper on vegetation fires and global change. And since earlier in this discussion, prescribed burning has been mentioned, in 2013, we produced a very comprehensive book about prescribed burning in Russia, together with the scientists of the Sukhachov Institute of Forest. And allow me, please, to spend 1 more minute on the history of cooperation, because I think that in the last decade, a number of initiatives have been organized together between Rosleshoz with Avi Alessachana and MCS, as well as my center. And this included a number of roundtables, which were held in Krasnoyarsk, and which I think should be revisited. The 10 points program of Krasnoyarsk, addressing the need for institutional capacity building. And finally, the warnings that have been sent out of the 2013 Congress in Novosibirsk, where the participants of the Congress, which included the regional agencies, formulated their conclusions by including the expression of a warning of a very dangerous development. And some other aspects have been addressed by the Novosibirsk Congress, which can be read in more detail, and I will be happy to summarize this for the proceedings of this year's IBFRA conference. With this, I would like to conclude and say many thanks to all of you for being so patient to listen to me. Thank you very much.
Thank you a lot, Johanna. And well, in fact, you posted very many questions to us and highlight very many challenges. On the other hand, much has already been done, and probably we should stay on the roads of cooperation and follow them. I took note of a couple of comments in the chat box, and first of all, I would read one from Diana Kopansky, who is asking about what sort of approaches to tackle peatland wildfires in the boreal governments applying. Well, dear speakers, dear participants, please read through chat box, and those of us who would be ready with the answer, we will invite you to do it after the next session. And now I suppose that we get 2 or 3 further speakers with whom we are going to further discuss what is on socioeconomic and the socio-ecological implications of wildfires. So for this, I would like to introduce our excellent speakers and kindly remind you to stick to 3 minutes. Unfortunately, for those who have presentation, we have longer period of time. For those who have just introduction, it is smaller. So Mr. Vladimir Dmitriev is the head of Department for Science and International Cooperation at the Federal Forestry Agency of Russia, where he leads work on forestry research, capacity building, communications, and international cooperation. Vladimir also takes part in the work on strategic planning and outlook development held by the Russian government on forestry-related issues. Mr. Edward Struzik is a writer, educator, public speaker, and a research fellow at the Institute for Energy and Environmental Policy in the School of Policy Studies at Queen's University in Kingston, Canada. For the past decade, he has been a regular contributing writer for YAL Environment 330, and international online journal offering opinion, analysis, and debate on global environmental issues. Well, Vladimir, the Federal Forestry Agency is pretty much involved in dealing with forest fires in Russia, alongside with regional authorities and other federal bodies. What do you think about how can governments and international organizations improve communication around wildfires, and what would be the key messages in this regard? The screen is yours.
You are muted, so you need to unmute yourself.
Большое спасибо, коллеги, за предоставленное слово и за ваше активное участие в этом мероприятии. Очень много интересной информации было, что называется, сообщено. Вот. Ну и что касается, как можно дальше реагировать на развитие лесопожарной ситуации, как мы можем совместно как-то предотвращать те последствия и те возможные негативные сценарии этих бедствий, которые вызывают лесные пожары. Тут, конечно, ну, прежде всего нам стоит во многом об этом задуматься. Ну, конечно, последние годы, особенно последние 5 лет, показывают, что это лесные пожары прекращают быть, ну, одной единственной темой и одной единственной проблемой какой-то профессии, там, например, лесных пожарных, там, или еще, там, служб по чрезвычайным ситуациям. Профилактика пожаров касается и граждан, и руководителей отдельных предприятий, которые работают в лесу, и администрации тех лесных регионов, где проживают граждане и живут люди. Вот, поэтому, ну, прежде всего необходимо хорошее информирование, хорошее взаимодействие, хорошее образование и просвещение граждан, чтобы они и могли предупредить пожар, и могли как бы адекватно действовать в случае обнаружения этого пожара. Ну, конечно, тут много внимания уделялось вопросам межведомственного и международного взаимодействия. Прежде всего, это, я думаю, касается обмена информацией, потому что в наше время кто владеет информацией, тот владеет и ситуацией, тот может правильно реагировать на развитие тех негативных процессов, которые связаны с пожарами, может их предупредить и может в том числе и сохранить жизни граждан, которые могут пострадать от огня. Ну и здесь, конечно, большой интерес вызывают те работы и та деятельность, которой занимаются там многие из вас. Это те и технологии тушения пожаров, и те модели климатические, которые существуют, о которых здесь рассказывали, и пожарные модели, пожарной динамики. Ну и в целом большой достаточно вклад могут внести все ученые наши граждане, все наши ученые, хотя бы в ту научную дискуссию, которая касается организации охраны лесов от пожаров. Что с ними дальше делать, насколько эффективны те выжигания профилактические, насколько эффективны те противопожарные мероприятия, которые есть, и как нам в дальнейшем управлять в целом лесным хозяйством для того, чтобы сократить и снизить ущерб от лесных пожаров. Ну, я в целом хочу всех поблагодарить. Надеюсь, что это наше совещание даст только следующий повод и следующий старт для новых подобных встреч, подобных дискуссий. И особенно они актуальны для наших бореальных лесов, в бореальной зоне. Так что до новых встреч. Большое спасибо.
Thank you a lot, Vladimir. Yeah, indeed, much is being talked about tropical forests and northern forests of boreal zone are much less in the view of general public, but hopefully with our common help, this balance would be reached. And also, I would like to take on board your notes about the proper education and training if we're speaking about adapting to the forest fire conditions, about the challenges that are forecasted by the previous speakers. So, of course, we should have people who are able to work on them, to be ready for them, and not just professional firefighters, but general public, youth included as well. With this, I would also like to invite Edward to share his point of view on how fire has been presented in the media over the years. Edward, as far as we know, you're currently writing a book on the history of fire in North America. So probably you can share some findings with us and give us a little bit deeper insight about whether measures taken are helpful or on the opposite, and what is your opinion, please?
Thank you. The book is in part on how the media has shaped public opinion and public policy on wildfire over the past 150 years. And one of the conclusions that I've come to is that nothing gets done unless it's thoroughly talked about and supported by the media. And if you look at what the present day situation is that we are doing, or the media is doing a very, very good job in presenting how we suppress fire. The number of water bombers that are in the air, the number of firefighters that are on the ground, our ability to detect fire and suppress fire. We're only beginning, the media, to address the issue of climate change, which I think is stalling the progress in dealing and adapting to wildfire. What we're completely missing, the media, is a number of issues about how to go beyond suppressing or detection and suppression. For example, we do not identify who are the stakeholders in the boreal forest. Who are those people most vulnerable? And those people are the indigenous people in Canada, who represent 4% of the population, but represent 40% of the evacuations in Canada and Alaska. They are also low-income people who live in the boreal forest because land prices are cheap, property taxes are low. You have the back to nature people who just want to get off the grid and live a more sustainable lifestyle. And then you have the high-income retirees who just want to get out of the big city, move into the boreal forest, build beautiful log cabins with cedar shingles for roofs, and trees all around them. They do not want to adapt to what is actually happening in the boreal forest. Irrespective of income, very few of these small boreal communities have the tax base to be able to do what is needed to adapt to the new fire paradigm that's emerging in the boreal forest. And so that's a big problem. And those are the people that we need to empower. Those are the stakeholders that have to adapt to what is happening. And how do we do it? We need to discuss in the media more cogently and articulately issues such as providing funding to these very small communities to hire, for example, an expert who can tell the community what needs to be done to make them more resilient. This is almost non-existent in most North American communities. Some of the more affluent towns are doing this, but they just don't have the tax base to be able to afford it. Or the funding that is necessary to do what the expert tells them to do, such as thin the forest, create a barrier around the community so that fire doesn't come so quickly, to develop evacuation plans as they do in Australia. In Alaska, the community Willow has more sled dogs than people, but they have a protocol in place to get the dogs out of town if a fire comes, but they have no plan for what to do with people. This is how far behind we are in really adapting to the new fire situations. we've got to provide tax incentives to encourage people to, build homes or to renovate homes that be more resilient to fire. We can't continue to build log homes in the boreal forest with cedar shake shingles. So we've got to encourage people with tax incentives to do what is necessary to make their homes more resilient, including landscaping. And finally, we have to do better education programs, as they're doing, as pointed out earlier in these discussions in Europe, to inform people how to become more fire smart. This is being done to some extent, but not as quickly as needs to be done. The other problem is that empowering stakeholders can only go so far. The current situation in much of North America and the boreal forest is that we leave it up to local emergency response committees to decide when to evacuate. Fort McMurray was the classic problem. The local emergency response committee, if they had ordered an evacuation, then that would have resulted in the shutdown of the oil sands industry, which is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And they were reluctant to do that because many of them worked for the industry, they depended on the industry, and then there would be a political fallout had they got everybody out of town and then there was no fire that came. What we have to do is we have to have more of a central organization with stakeholder participation to decide these big decisions and not leave it up to political implications, such as happened in Fort McMurray. And so how do we do this? I think that we've really just got to bring in the stakeholders to work with federal, state, provincial authorities and with indigenous communities, with business, to come up with a national plan, in some cases an international plan, is how do we deal with this new paradigm that is unfolding? And finally, I'd like to emphasize is that nothing is going to get done unless we go to the media and argue these things out. We can talk a lot about suppression, the media loves it, but they are not paying attention to what really needs to be done to make boreal communities more resilient. And unless we get the media on board, we're going to fail, and we're going to see a lot more Fort McMurray type situations and what's happening in British Columbia, what's happening in Yakutia, and even Finland now, more often, and it's going to be unacceptable. We will reach a tipping point, which I think we already have, and it's going to be too late. Thank you.
Thank you a lot, Edward. Great observations, really, from the perspective that is sometimes out of our discussions. And indeed, media love burning issues when something is already distracted and it is hitting headlines, right? And the people love sharing it via their social networks, but probably these technologies should be used also to update people, local people, I know students, elderly people, everybody who are fire prone, who are vulnerable, who are interested, etc. And draw more attention on how to prevent and how to live with fires, including their infrastructure, houses, businesses, and all. It would be really helpful. So we count on you to stay with us in this cooperation. Really, it will be helpful. All right, colleagues, I see that our chat got vivid at last, and I think that we should take some questions from over there. So I would like to start with the one about dealing with peat fires. Yes, I have mentioned it beforehand. So what is the governmental or indigenous response to peat fires? Any volunteers to reply? Please raise your hands.
The question is, what is the government response to
peat fires?
Well, the government response really is traditionally to throw out as much person power, air power, to suppress fires. This is necessary from a political point of view, but the problem is that they're not doing enough to empower local communities to become more resilient in fires. We're very happy here in Canada and the United States to compensate people with millions and millions of dollars when they get burned and to evacuate them, which costs millions and millions of dollars. But we're not prepared to invest in what is really needed to adapt to the situation. It is, the environmental accounting here is completely, it's ridiculous. So much money is spent on suppression and compensation, and so little is invested in making local communities more resilient. It doesn't cost a lot. I think we've learned that lesson in Europe with flooding. We've learned that lesson in Europe now with flooding in North America, is we're just telling people you cannot live in a floodplain unless, you know, you just can't do this. But we are now letting people move into the boreal forest without being able to deal with wildfire, and this makes no sense.
Thank you. Yeah, it is better to get prepared, yes, and invest in this than, well, already pay money when it is all destroyed and help needed. So probably both should be addressed in policies. Thank you, Edward. Thank you a lot. Getting further to the chat box here. So I can see. Well, some questions. Yeah, I probably just let me scroll there. So a question from Dmitry Shipashenko. Yeah, well, Dmitry mentioned that most of presentations are focused on observation of increased fire risks, burnt area, and severity of wildfires. We were afraid, we all consented. Next step would be to discuss the measures. So what are the options to fight the situation and how to live with wildfires? So prescribed burning, whether suitable for all forests, and probably there are some other efficient management options. So we have discussed drivers, we have discussed trends, we have discussed some issues about landscape solutions, and any other probably measures, ideas from those who haven't taken part yet from other countries, other organizations. Please, colleagues. Those who would like to intervene, just raise your hand. Yeah, I can see a hand from Vyacheslav Haruk. Yes, Vyacheslav, please.
Thank you. Thank you for opportunity. Colleagues, we could accept the paradigm or change of paradigm that in the future now we cannot suppress all fires. It is impossible. We can understand it, also accept that in the future, burning rate and how the increase of smoke, fire smoke will be increasing. Let me cite, for example, Mark Flanagan, he predicted that it will be twice or even more smoke than now in the end of this century. Moreover, wildfires, if we, for example, in our large dominant communities in Siberia, in the permafrost area, if, potentially, or in dreams, will suppress all fires, larch will lose its position. It will almost disappear because fires are essential for large regeneration establishment. And instead of fighting with the fires in the remote areas, for example, in Siberia, send their water tanks. Let them part of fires quickly, and we do it. In fact, how say, to develop along the wide landscapes and focus our efforts on the protection people's lives, people's health, people's properties, infrastructure. Because again, even in very rich countries, like USA, it is, you know, the situation in California, it is impossible even over there to the country to suppress fires. And I know that ecologists, many ecologists, or some ecologists understand that a role of fires as a natural factor of ecosystem of how say regeneration or re-establishment, or for they play a great role in the some forest type for supporting forest health. And again, it's known fact, if you will suppress fires, it happens in some areas. Accumulation more and more fuel material will be provocated foregoing more catastrophic fires than without the suppression. So we could how say take into the consideration that while warming is going on, fires burn rate will be increased, and we have to adapt our strategy of fire fighting and protecting people to this very unpleasant perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Vyacheslav. Thank you for highlighting the essential need and, well, a natural phenomena of forest fires. On the other hand, we have already taken note about your observation that, well, politicians, they though don't give money for helicopters, yeah, but although it looks good on the next campaign, but they should probably give more money to land managers, yes, and that can help more. So probably there should be some kind of balance. Of course, land managers will help when the fire is near them, but when the fire is in very remote territories, well, probably we cannot do much without let us go further to some other observations. I can see Werner Kurz making a couple of questions about the link between wildfire emissions and goals to achieve net zero. So can we increase resilience against wildfire while advancing the goals of larger bioeconomies? Werner, are you with us? Would you like to share your opinion, please?
Yeah, I think what I have missed in this discussion today was the link between feedbacks to climate change from wildfire emissions. The IPCC in its last report and in previous reports of the 6th assessment cycle has clearly identified that we must achieve net zero and net negative emissions as soon as possible. And we around the world are beginning to invest into natural climate solutions in order to create larger sinks in the land sector. At the same time, climate change is already having massive impacts on fire emissions.
Werner, please unmute yourself.
Yeah, it said the host muted me. Anyway, so very briefly, basically the concern I have is that we have not established the link between feedback to climate change and wildfire emissions in this discussion. We need to raise the awareness of politicians that it is not just about firefighting. In the long term, with climate change, that will become increasingly futile. We must redesign our landscapes. We must reduce the fuel loads. We must change the characteristics of the fuel. We must have more fuel breaks, more hardwood species and less conifers. And we must ask ourselves whether the huge amounts of biomass that is the surplus from a century of fire suppression can be used in a bioeconomy in such a way that we enhance natural climate solutions and enhance carbon sinks. Until we understand the linkages between these various cycles and can demonstrate to politicians that if we don't address wildfire emissions, planting more trees is simply not going to be a solution. We just need to look at the quantities of carbon that will be taken up by tree planting efforts such as the 1 trillion tree initiative globally, or the 2 billion tree initiative in Canada, and compare those tree uptakes 30, 40, 50 years in the future against today's wildfire emissions, which are orders of magnitude greater. So frankly, if we don't address the wildfire emission, natural climate solutions are not going to take us very far. Thank you.
Can I add one thing? One other solution. There's a lot of investment, a lot of talk about planting trees, which is all great. Everybody loves trees. But I think a more effective solution is to restore our degraded wetlands and our peatlands, which really are a firefighter's best friend. Most fires stop when they reach a swamp, a bog, a fen, a mire. And as Europe knows, they've destroyed most of the fens, the mires in Europe. Russia has drained quite a bit of theirs. In North America, we've drained an awful lot of our wetlands, and it's easily and effectively restored. It does not cost a lot of money to regrow a peatland, to accumulate peat. The technology is there. It's a lot cheaper than planting trees, which require a lot of fertilizer, which we don't know how well those trees are going to adapt to climate change. But if we grow a lot of sphagnum moss, which is easily done, and we employ a lot more beavers, relocate them into critical areas, which was done in the United States in the 1940s and 1950s when as a firefighting tool. These are some natural solutions that we have that I think that we're overlooking because, you know, it's really nice. Planting trees is a very, very kind of wholesome thing to do. But people aren't so much interested in bogs, mires, and fens because they're buggy, they're mushy. But I think we have to change the public view of these ecosystems.
Thank you, Edward, and thank you, Werner. These are great observations and the topics that we should probably get further on board for our discussion. I also see a hand from Andrei Syrian, followed by Darren Sleep, and I suppose that these are all that we can take today. So Andrei, you first, and Darren, you please follow.
Thank you very much. Very nice that we start to talk about peatlands. Very short comment. Russia in 2010 applied the largest rewetting activity in Northern Hemisphere, rewetting 73,000 hectares in Moscow region only, and showing the decrease of peat fires after that, and now expanding this activity to other provinces. And from 2020, rewetting is included in national reporting to climate convention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrei. Yeah, it's important to know. Yeah, Darren, yeah, please.
Just very quickly, I know that we're running short on time. I just wanted to sort of address Werner's point about making the connection between reducing wildfire and how we do that management. This has been a change that the SFI standard has brought in our most recent revision to our standard. And we have a fire resilience and awareness objective now within our standard that requires certified organizations to really think about reducing wildfire risk at a landscape scale, putting those practices in place that Werner listed several of them that will help reduce wildfire risk, as well as working with communities to educate communities about fire resilience and awareness in their local communities to overall reduce the incidence of wildfire. What is going to be needed, and I'll be addressing this in session 13 later on today, but what is going to be needed to do that to some degree is we're going to need to think about research at a landscape level that we know that we can put plans together to reduce wildfire risk at a broad scale. It's not at your stand level, it's at the landscape level. I think we can get there. I think we've probably got all the tools. We just have to think about how to put them all together. So I did drop into the chat a comment about SFI's revised standard, as well as a link to where you can find the information on the updated standards to address that.
Thank you a lot. Thank you, Darren. Yeah, I see your comment in the chat box and some links. And in fact, I would like to invite all colleagues before changing to some other events and sessions to have a look through the chat, because there are very many interesting comments, further questions and links that will be really interesting. I'm confident. So unfortunately, we don't have too much time, and probably we should have made it a 2 days event. But on the other hand, I have been taking notes during this session, and as far as we can see, well, the international cooperation is a great tool to address all those very many questions, very many challenges that are around us. I mean, in the sphere of forest fires and related areas. As Alexander put it, we cannot manage climate, but, well, and we cannot manage weather, but we can learn how better to live with forest fires. And with this, we can, of course, make great use of our cooperation. So to develop evidence-based policy measures, to back them up with science, to take note of local experts, local communities, to pay good attention to education, capacity building, and just normal upbringing of youth, of younger generations. To bear in mind the cross-sectoral approaches, well, climate, carbon as their crossing line, probably, as well as landscape approaches as something that is bridges between pits, lakes, precipitation, soils, and the forest ecosystems. So very much here on our desks. And with your permission, I would like to invite you all to contribute further to this international cooperation. From my side, I would be pleased to feed back to the team of specialists on boreal forests, and we, with your permission again, would publish all the presentations and relevant materials on the webpage. So I would invite you all to stay in contact in this loop for further joint efforts, discussions, and activities. And with that, I would like to thank everybody, all the speakers and our participants, IBFRA and UNECE FAO secretariats for organization, as well as our great interpreters for doing very heavy but vital work for all of us. Thank you all, dear colleagues, dear friends, and I would not take more of your time. Please further, follow with other events of IBFRA conference, and have a safe and great weekend. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria. And thank you, Leonie and Oliver, for hosting the event. We have a few minutes. Leonie, Oliver, do you have a final remark or comment?
Well, I just want to say, also reiterate the thanks. It was a really interesting discussion. We took many points, Oliver and myself, and I wanted to also take this opportunity to thank Oliver, because he's been a really great help with organizing this event, reaching out to all the speakers. And we're really happy to have had you all on board and hearing so much about wildfires in the last 2 hours. And I would also encourage you all to join the next session led by Darren and Maureen, because this is also going to be extremely interesting on the policy science interface. So thank you, and thanks, Elaine, and yeah, have a great afternoon, morning, wherever you are, evening.